Hey everybody, Tony here from Boost to Hit, and today we've got another lore episode. But before we do our lore episode, I do want to make an announcement. As of the recording of this, we are about 4 people away from 250 subscribers, which is super exciting because we are just at the 1 year mark of the channel. So, because of that, right, I want to do a giveaway. So, after we hit 250, I'm going to post another video up about a giveaway we're going to be doing for the channel. And we'll probably start doing these more often whenever we hit, pretty big milestones. Maybe when we get to 300 or 350. But, anyways, that's later on. Let's just jump into now. So, today's lore episode is going to be all about the Orgoth. We're going to talk a little bit about their past, about how their machines work, and how they keep getting information from across the sea on the updates of Imran so that they can go and try to take it over again. And with that being said, everybody, let's dig in. So the Orgoth are a really interesting culture, right? So Orgoth in the setting of the Iron Kingdoms have always been a bit of a boogeyman. They came to the shores of Imran at 608 BR. That's a little over 1200 years before the current setting. And they went in, they were subjugated the entire island, and after about 608 years, the people of Imran got very upset about it and decided to do the rebellion. And that's why whenever you see like 622 AR, 612 AR, that is, AR stands for after the rebellion. So that's after the rebellion started. But it took Imran almost another 400 years to go and get the Orgoth out of Imran. And a mere 200-ish years later, they're back again. But even before that, right, we need to really look at the culture of the Orgoth and even understand their relationship between the Orgoth and the arcane. So the Orgoth are an ancient warrior civilization and were among one of the first ones to know the face of Minoth. And usually when you meet your god, you're going to praise them and worship them. But the Orgoth were like, no, we're not doing any of that. They ended up rejecting their creator and instead decided that they were going to find new patrons to give them knowledge and power. And they did this by searching the void, searching around. And while traveling through the void, they ended up starting to hear a call from these infernals. Now, there's a couple of different sects of infernals, and the ones that they heard from were the Felgoth infernals. And the Felgoth granted them the gift of magic. And what they said is, you worship us, you give us souls as tithes, and we will give you immense powers. And one of the first things was the gift of magic. They also, in the Path of Shadows, was created. And the Path of Shadows was the process where if the strongest warriors, the strongest warlords died, they had a path to be reincarnated, as long as they kept giving them tons and tons and tons of souls. And what this allowed really the Orgoth to do is that whenever they went and conquered other islands, other civilizations, if somehow their greatest warriors died, they would be reincarnated and they would have most of their memories, or at least part of their memories, of what had happened before, so they could bring that knowledge back to the home world. They didn't have everything, but they did have some of it. And what was great with this, right, is that you had these great warriors that could continuously live forever. But the downside was that the society itself became really stagnated because those who rose to power were very cunning, but not always strategic. But you know what? As they continued to grow their magic, their science also faltered. But time to time, they would subjugate people capable of technological refinement, and they would strip them of those secrets so that they could continue to grow. Eventually, through this process of them taking over other civilizations, other countries, they ended up understanding how to do shipbuilding, working with metals, and even the construction of fortifications, which their famous black rock fortifications is something that they learned from other cultures that are probably no longer around. Now, for the most part, right, they trusted their slaves to do everyday tasks. But when it came to their potent arcane weapons, they could not trust the people that they had enslaved to go create those. So over time, the war witches slowly learned to master the production of them. And when the Orgoth would take over land, right, they would also take some of those slaves and send it back to their home world, I guess their homeland, so that they could understand that process more and more and kind of embedded into their culture a little bit more. Now, jump forward to whenever the rebellion happened, right? Humans were granted the gift of magic, and that was something that then they started creating these warjacks. At the time, they were probably about the size of colossals. And then they eventually drove the Orgoth out, and whenever the Orgoth were about to leave, they were at one of their last fortifications on the isle next to Crix, and Crix ended up being able to kill a lot of them and then take the war witches that were left there and turn them into like necrotex. Now, this was really damning for the Orgoth at the time, but eventually ended up helping them in the future. So as this was happening, Orgoth began the slow process of also turning their slave different industries to crafting new types of machines, because they saw what was happening in Imran and they wanted their other cultures, their other slaves to start doing this. This went on for probably about 150 years or so, or however long. But those original war witches that were captured by Crix, some of them found a way to escape the bonds of the Crixian necromancy, and in turn be able to return back to the Felgoth to go and give their knowledge. And whenever they did this, right, they ended in the halls of their infernal masters. They ended up bartering the use of their knowledge that they learned from Crix to try to be reborn. Now, they were allowed to be reborn, but they were not reborn as these warlords. Instead, they were born as disgraced and defeated servants, no longer fit to even be called Orgoth, but still had knowledge to create their own arcane constructs. And this group ended up being known as the Velkar. They were people trained with dark mechanica, and they started training the Orgoth how to use these dark mechanicas. One thing that they ended up doing was looking at the process of creating a cortex. Now, we know that in Khador and Signar, even in Menoth, they use archaic runes to go and create cortexes. But Crix is a little bit more chaotic, right? They end up taking a version of a soul and trapping it in there. Well, Orgoth did something similar, but instead of taking souls, they took the souls of wild beasts. So they would find these giant beasts throughout the land, and they would create dark rituals on them to be able to trap them in, and taking the soul and then implementing it into a cortex, forcing it in there, and then creating runes around it to trap that soul in there. That is actually one of the Orgoth's kind of like traits to become an adult, is to find one of these great beasts, bring them back, and then have the Volkar be able to trap their soul into a cortex. Now, what this does for their Warjacks is that they are more savage. They're very more animalistic, and you can see that in game terms about how they interact, especially with their heads. Another unique thing about the Orgoth is how they power their machines. So you have Menoth, that use Menoth's Fury, that's special fire. You have Khador and the Gravediggers that use coal, and then you have the Storm Legion and part of Signar that uses electrical power, right? Now, Orgoth use a thing called Blaze, and I'm going to mispronounce this volcano, I apologize, but it's taken from the raging volcano Halgreth Gruul. I believe that's how you pronounce it, Halgreth Gruul. It is on their home world, and the reason why it has to be taken from this particular volcano is because this was a site where they would do countless sacrifices, and as you sacrifice these souls, this molten lava ended up gaining a lot of characteristics that are very similar to necrotite, because it has the souls have been trapped within this, and it creates its own source of power. And that's kind of what gives not only their Warjacks but also their mechanica this weird red glow. And like I said, it works really similar to necrotite because it's rich with necrotitic energy, but it is very, very destructive to the touch. So in order to be able to even use it, they have to have it contained in arcane vessels to be handled and manipulated. This has a lot of benefits because it makes their weapons really strong, but for any of their range weapons, it does make them fairly inaccurate because Blaze itself is very unstable. So, as the Orgoth are developing all these things, question is, how do they even know what was going on in Emerald? Well, they did this really within two ways. Is that, like I said before, they weren't always strategic, but they were always very clever and cunning. And they had people that were still, in essence, loyal to Orgoth in some way, that were constantly feeding them information over the last 200 years, telling them what nations are rising, what technology is going on, where are their weak points, what is going on with this and this. And that's probably one of the reasons why whenever they first landed, they landed in Khador, because while Khador was still growing strong, it had just been a few years after the troubles had hit Khador and had really hurt a lot of that civilization. But also, throughout all of Emerald, they have these dark artifacts that are left there. One of them was the mechanica, and they almost grew a mind of their own. With the mechanica, that's what people think that the Death Jack was created from. But this would tempt Arcanus to start reading its dark knowledge, and through that, they would be able to almost communicate with the Felgoth in a way, and then the Felgoth would then relay that information potentially to the Orgoth. And that's kind of where we're at now, right? So after 200 years of being away, they have decided to create their second invasion and come in. As you see that the world is starting to get a little more crazy, the Orgoth have been doing a pretty successful job, and even recently they have teamed up with Crix. So we are looking to see how that's gonna unfold, and really what this next chapter is. The latest thing with the Orgoth is they took down one of the great dragons, Blightergas, and took his soul. And while part of his soul was given to another individual, we know that the bulk of that soul was given to Denegra, so she can then give it to Torok, the Dragon Father, just creating that stronger bond between Crix and Orgoth. Now, at some point, one of them's going to turn on each other. They're both probably going to turn on each other, but that's part of a future story that I am excited to look into and to talk to you all about. And that's really, for the most part, that's what we're going to talk about with Orgoth today. So any questions, any comments, please put down below. As always, everyone, I'm super happy you got spend time with me, listening to me ramble on about a little bit of lore. That being said, peace.